So you've had basically the Eurovision contest at your place. It's the Gartshore Vision contest.
All right, good job.
Oh, such professionalism. We love it. This is great.
Oh, yes, we know what we're doing.
Welcome back. This is episode 4 of...
Stop it! Stop it! STOP, new word, 19. Stop it! Well, then stop it.
We are the three amigos, the Oregon Rebels. My name is Aaron Shows, and I am a modern-aged man.
My name is Fraser Gartshore, and I refuse to call myself a modern-aged man. I am definitely a middle-aged, stay-at-home dad and occasional organist.
And I am Jerry Martin, and I have been referred to as a middle-aged organist, and I am going to own it. Welcome to Stop It, everyone.
Stop it.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, friends, it's that part of the episode where we go around and see what's been happening since we last recorded one of these.
So what have I been doing in the last month? Well, there has been a lot. I think it's hard to kind of condense this down into a few things, but I'll just pick some highlights. So the first thing after we recorded the last podcast, I had a wild hair to try using my digital drum machine along with Hauptwerk, the virtual pipe organ software, and running both together. And so I affixed to my pedal board at home a couple different Boss pedals. One pedal does a start and stop of the drum pattern, and the other one does a fill pattern. So if for the non-drummers out there, a fill pattern is like when you have one groove and you're trying to transition into another groove. Say, for instance, on a song between the verse and a chorus, there's often a different groove for the chorus of a song. So I had that running live on YouTube as a live stream, and it worked really well. I don't think it's been done before on YouTube. I don't know if it's even been done before in real life. I'm probably, at some point in time, I'm probably sure somebody has maybe used a drum machine with a pipe organ together. Maybe. I have seen videos on YouTube of people using drum kits with pipe organ. I've seen people do the Vito Toccata with drum set and pipe organ. So anyway, that was one of the things, and that's going to connect to another highlight of mine that happened later. But before I get to that, the second highlight of mine was that in the last month, I had a new publication come out of organ music. Now, this is very, very early in the year for this kind of music, but it's going to be for Christmas. And this is through my publisher, Augsburg Fortress Publishers, AFP. And they're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. You betcha. And so, yes, they've published a few other of my collections of organ music. And this is the second Christmas one. So this one is called Gladsome Tidings, and it's a collection of lesser arranged, I'll say it that way. There's a lot of music for organ for Christmas time, obviously, but the pieces that I chose for this particular collection, I think, are mostly unique. It includes Patapan. It's got the Coventry Carol, the Sands Day Carol. One of my favorite ones out of the book actually is Still, Still, Still. It's the very last one in the book. And it plays with the idea that we know the melody of Still, 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 or Still, Still, Still. But I leave out notes of that melody. And so I let your internal ear hear the melody that's happening. So I give you hints of the melody throughout in real time. Anyway, it's more than you need to know about that. But basically the idea is this is a collection of organ solo music for Christmas time, and it's called Gladsome Tidings, and you can get it online. I believe there is also a digital version on their site as well. So if you need a PDF of it, you can do that as well. My first one through them was a Christmas book actually as well. So the first book that I had through Augsburg was called Sounding Joy, as in repeat the sounding joy. And I wish they had printed some repeat signs on both sides of the text of the title of the book. That would have been definitely my line of humor for repeat the sounding joy. But anyway, it's called Sounding Joy. And then I had another one that was based on hymns for Christ the King Sunday, which is the last Sunday of the church year before you go into Advent. So I just finished a big concert at my own church in Pasadena, and it was a concert of silent film music. And I did this last year for the very first time. So this was sort of the round 2 of this, a sequel concert of this. So I chose 2 short films that starred Buster Keaton. One was called The Balloonatic from 1923. And the other one was called 1 Week from 1920. So both the films were over 100 years old. And it was a lot of fun to try this. And it's a unique thing because most of the time when you go watch a silent film and you hear the score being played live, it's usually either a piano or maybe a theater organ. But this was in my church in the sanctuary with a church organ. And the organ that I was playing it on was built in 1924. So it was kind of a cool way to connect the two, where these films that were coming out the same time that this organ was being built. So there was kind of a cool connection there of Hollywood history mixed with an organ being built very near Hollywood. So that was I think a very successful concert. And I also opened that concert with a 100th year anniversary tribute to the great film composer, Henry Mancini. And he was born in 1924. And with that, I did a medley of his most famous tunes. And then also with those songs, I lugged my big keyboard amp and I put it behind the organ console so it was out of view. And I set my drum machine on the bench next to me, and I triggered all of the drum patterns from the console. So the one-man band of playing both organ manuals and pedals and pushing buttons on a drum machine next to me. So it actually mixed really well in the sanctuary, and people were quite impressed. And that, again, something that has probably not been done before, acoustic pipe organ with drum machine. At least I haven't ever heard of that happening before. So it's definitely a thing that I'm going to try some more of. And I think it was quite a success to try that out this year. So yeah, in the last month, it's been organ and drums, organ and percussion. And the first time was virtual in YouTube land. And the second time was in real land, in real Hollywood land, I guess you could say.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So much exciting stuff. Well, what about you, Fraser? What have you been up to?
Ooh, what have I been up to in the last few weeks? Well, the main thing I've been up to, in the musical world at least, is I am branching into the world of sample set creation. Yes, I too want to get into well, actually, this is something I've been looking at for a very, very long time, but I want to get into the world of sample set creation, primarily for Hauptwerk, which is, of course, what we are all using, and it's the most sophisticated way of playing sample sets of sampled organs. It's a lot of samples in one sentence. But yes, this is something I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. And finally, I've sort of thrown myself down the rabbit hole of learning all about sampling for Hauptwerk. Now, the actual physical recordings of the samples, that's the easy part. And the bit that I'm learning about at the moment, thanks to your help, Mr. Martin, thanks to your help, the main bit I'm learning about at the moment is the sort of behind the scenes kind of things. You know, what does Hauptwerk need? So I'm learning about different kinds of sampling, how samples are created, ideally, so that they can then be used for Hauptwerk. Obviously, samples have to be recorded and cleaned up. That's a very important thing. This is something I was talking to someone about this not that long ago, and they said, well, surely it's just a matter of going and recording various length notes of each pipe on the organ and then popping it into Hauptwerk. And I said, yes, well, theoretically, yes, but you have to clean up all extraneous noise from those samples first before you can do it. And he said, yeah, but why? We want the extraneous noise for the realistic feel of playing the actual organ. And I had to casually remind him, well, that's fine if you're only playing one note at a time. But if you start playing, let's say, 3 notes and you have 10 stops pulled, then you're going to have 30 times the extraneous noise that you recorded. So, it doesn't work that way. So you have to remove the extraneous noise. You can put it back in at a later date, but you put it back in, of course, individually at a later date. So these are all the little things that I'm having to learn at the time. I've actually set up a crowdfunding project. I realized that although I do have exceptionally exciting equipment, I have very good microphones. Not enough, but I have very good microphones. I do have a good recorder. We talked about that last time, the Zoom F6 32-bit floating point field recorder. And I do have cables and stands and all that sort of thing. But there's still a few things that are missing along the way. And also, it's incredibly time consuming. So this is going to become a kind of full-time project for me over the next few months. And in order for that to come to fruition, I've started a crowdfunding campaign, and the idea behind that is I will fill out the gaps with the bits and pieces that we still need. There are ideally some extra microphones that I could have for different positions in the church. When you're recording samples for the organ, you want to have a sort of varied sound. You want to have samples taken close up at the organ, not inside the organ case. That's a different kind of thing altogether, but close up to the organ. And then in the building, whether it's a church or a concert hall or whatever it's going to be, maybe even a cinema, you want to get further away from the organ. So you've got different kinds of microphones that use different fields, different audio fields. They capture different sounds from different distances in layman's terms. And, ideally, I would like to get the exact right microphones to be able to get that done. Now, of course, as this project goes on and as I start creating sample sets, this can, of course, take months. I realize that, eventually some of these sample sets will be able to create revenue, and that revenue can, of course, then be used to get some more gear and some more exciting things. But for the beginning, I want to be able to produce the best quality sample sets I can from the beginning. So that's part of the reason for setting that up. And like I said, because it's going to be a very, very time-consuming process, I'm going to be leaving some of my other activities by the wayside, even cancelling some of my activities so I can get this done within a reasonable time frame. Certain people have told me that the creation of a medium-sized sample set can take, in fact, will take several months of pretty much full-time work. So this is something I'm very much looking forward to. It's going to be a challenge. It has been a challenge already so far, but I'm going back to basics. I feel like I'm back in my sort of studio days again. Writing pencil on paper in an old-fashioned lined notebook. I'm visiting organs. I'm taking notes. I'm writing everything down. This is very important for anyone else who's interested in this kind of thing, and anyone who's had any kind of studio experience. You'll know what I'm talking about. But it is absolutely vital that you write down absolutely everything you do, no matter how irrelevant you think that might be. At some point in the future, a little light will pop on in your head saying, "Oh God, when I was there, I did it this way. What did I do?" Well, you go and dig out your notebook from that recording, and lo and behold, you've got your notes. You know exactly what you did, and now you can recreate it. That is absolutely vital for any kind of recording project. Very, very, very important indeed. So, in a nutshell, that's pretty much all I've been up to, actually. Other than that, like I said at the beginning, I'm basically just a stay-at-home dad at the moment. More on that next time.
Well, what have I been up to since we last recorded one of these? Goodness, I have to stop and think. Well, work has certainly been busy. Of course, I did just have a recent live stream, which was a change up from what I'd originally planned to do. But I covered actually some of the topics we're going to go over in today's podcast about the history of Hauptwerk. So I'm excited to discuss it with you guys and go into a little bit more depth. I guess I have to confess, I've been suffering from gear acquisition syndrome, or maybe software acquisition syndrome. I've been continuing to learn a lot more about digital audio. That's all I'm going to say for right now. So watch this space. And now for our main topic.
Well, today's episode, we're going to be discussing something we mentioned last time, and that is the world of electric/virtual/cloud organs. I don't know, something along those lines. So things that we've all talked about before in the past with organs, with pipe organs and having actual pipes. But of course, in the last, this had been the last 70 years or so. I'm trying to think how far back we can go. Organs have taken on the same kind of route as synthesizers, as organs always have been essentially acoustic synthesizers.
Right.
And so the natural way of things was once we began having instruments that were electric based, going back as far as even one of Jerry's instruments, which requires no hands to I mean, I guess it does require hands, but no touching involved. And that is the theremin.
Wow. The first electronic musical instrument. Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, that whole natural way of things led to the creation of organs. And I guess that's going to be today's topic, is we'll talk about how the organ evolved in the 20th century to adapt to electricity, and became what it is today, with where we have complete virtual recreations of actual pipe organs. So, yes, where should we begin with this?
Where on earth do we start with that?
Well, I could, since I am the thereminist of the group, I could give a very brief overview of how electronic music started.
Is that even a word? Thereminist?
Indeed. Yeah. So I can reminisce on my history. And then Fraser, you in our last episode, you mentioned the Yamaha Electone, but also the Hammond organ and whatnot. I would love to hear about all of that. And then we can talk about Hauptwerk and sampling and synthesizers. And fortunately, we have a cinematic expert in such things as well. So anyhow, yes, the theremin, which some of you may have seen me play online, that was the first electrical or electronic musical instrument invented by Russian physicist Leon Theremin. He was working on shortwave radios at the time and noticed that the radio circuits, I mean, if you've played with an old radio, you'll know as you're dialing between radio stations, you sometimes hear all those pops and squeaks and all those fun sounds. So he wondered, could I make a musical instrument out of that? And, this is where creativity comes from. When, the creativity doesn't necessarily start with, the Bible of how a thing is done. It's like, I wonder if we can do a crazy thing, and let's do it. So that was how it all started. And basically, the theremin is a radio. The traditional analog theremin has two tuning circuits, but instead of turning a dial, it uses the term is capacitance. So the distance between your body as the ground and an antenna is used to control pitch and volume. So there's two tuning circuits. So the very first theremins were purely analog, and that started the electronic musical age in the area of radio. And there were attempts to make keyboard instruments at the time. I remember when I was researching theremins, there's a fascinating organ type instrument, perhaps a precursor to the Hammond organ. It was the telharmonium, this massive machine that was used to produce tones of various pitches that they would play down telephone lines. So it was designed to provide potted music to New York City back around the time of the theremin. So, they would pay a subscription service to have this music that was piped in, played by somebody on this massive electronic console. But anyhow, be it as it may, the theremin was where it began, and Bob Moog of synthesizer fame, when he was a kid, he was making theremins from kits, and the Moog synthesizer company started with theremins, and he used that inspiration to move into the whole synthesizer world, and that kind of brings us down that rabbit hole. But prior to the theremin, all musical instruments were analog, or I guess acoustic is what I should say. So the pipe organ, as we've talked for centuries, air moving through pipes, strings being plucked. But here now we have electricity being modulated and sound coming out of a speaker. Well, other manufacturers were starting to wonder, okay, pipe organs are big, massive contraptions. Is there a way to produce sound? So Fraser, the tone wheel organ, or as you understand it, how does that even work?
That's a good question. Now you're picking my brains on this. I'm not exactly sure. It's all electrostatic. No, it's not. It's electromagnetic, isn't it? It's electromagnetic in Hammond's case. In John Compton, that was the British organ builder, he also did something similar to the Hammond, and that was electrostatic. So very different. But Hammond was electromagnetic. So tone wheels spinning around and these signals being picked up, like a guitar pickup, basically, being picked up and then amplified through, at the beginning, just a speaker, and then eventually being through a rotating speaker, the Leslie speaker.
A blender, essentially. Yeah.
The blender, basically, yes. How old is the Hammond organ? 30s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So the theremin was like in the
Mid-30s?
1910s, early 1920s. So the Hammond, that was the peak innovation in electrical instruments. So I think probably around the 30s. But it was those spinning discs with their little teeth. So almost like bicycle spokes. And as those little teeth moved past a pickup, that caused the pickup to vibrate, and that's what generated the tone. But
and also the wonderful sequence of starting a Hammond organ. Have you all had the chance to start a proper Hammond organ?
But
you've not,
gosh,
Jerry.
I
You don't
love
know what
the
you must.
concept.
It's like starting an old car. You have to. First of all, you've got a little starter switch that you push, and that gets the motors running. You can hear the tone wheels going, and then when you think they're warm enough, when you think they've got enough speed to them, you flip the second switch, and that's the actual power for the organ itself. That's the amplifier, etc. And then you let go of the initial switch, the starter switch, and hopefully they're going to keep spinning under their own power.
Amazing.
It's wonderful.
Amazing.
You've always got that lovely sound of the tone wheels spinning away in the background. And of course, they create rather a lot of warmth at some point as well.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Wonderful experience. There's the smell, the sound, and this general feel of an original Hammond organ is something that everybody should experience at some point. I always go on about the smell of instruments. For example, an English organ smells a certain way. The console smells a certain way. But a Hammond organ has that smell. It sort of has that electric, but there's oil in there as well for it to keep the parts moving. So you've got that lovely sort of mechanical, almost automotive smell to a Hammond organ. I love it.
And the Hammond organs, so Fraser, in their early applications, were Hammonds intended to be, were they marketed to the church crowd, or were they marketed for home use or concerts? Do you know much about what they were
definitely
thinking?
A bit of both. They were marketed actually, or they were also marketed, let's not forget, also to smaller cinemas who maybe couldn't afford an enormous cinema organ. Now, of course, talkies were definitely part of the show by the mid-30s in cinemas, but smaller cinemas couldn't afford to have a huge Wurlitzer or Morton or Kilgan theatre organ installed.
Right.
And they were going out of fashion anyway, so a Hammond organ was a definite sort of alternative to that. I think the original Hammonds, they didn't cost, back in the 1930s, this was an astronomical amount of money, but you could pick up a Hammond organ with an amplifier for just over $1,000 back in the 30s.
Wow.
Now think about it. I mean, a theatre organ in the 30s would still, even then, have been costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, this is, it's crazy kind of stuff. And of course, and then at that price range, you are automatically going to attract people for, let's say, maybe smaller churches, and also the home user as well.
Yeah. Right. And I know there were organists back then. Fraser, you introduced me to Porter Heaps, and he was a Hammond salesman.
Yeah, that's right.
So the idea was to try and get these instruments out. But at some point then, I guess, as musicians were innovating and popular music was developing, somehow the Hammond organ got sucked into so many bands. And I wonder how that got started. Do we know who might have been first, or who were some of the important Hammond users? I guess you guys might be able to drop some names there. When you think about
I mean, this is Booker T would probably be the most famous, one of the most famous, the earliest ones. As you move on, you've got someone like Billy Preston. Billy Preston was also involved with the Beatles at the end. They called him the fifth Beatle for a while.
Yeah.
That's right, Billy Preston. And then, of course, Deep Purple, John Lord. And the possibly one of the most famous of the lot of them. Can I drop some names? I've had the privilege of playing with two of those names over the years. But
Well,
I mean, that sound,
I was going to say, a big part of it was that it was difficult to lug those things around. And when bands were starting to gig, I mean, oftentimes have a Hammond player that would be part of it, but it would take like 4 guys to carry the thing up the stairs into a room. So it was quite a bulky, heavy thing. And I think what helped later on with the advent of synthesizers and things is you started seeing more home organs that were built off of sort of we've mentioned this before in a previous episode, but analog synthesis, and that's kind of what I guess took some of the weight out of it. It really evolved. I guess I don't know when you could even say the first electronic organs would have been. Would that have been 60s maybe, when you get from Hammond doing the tone wheel thing into actual capacitors,
into
and
actual
things.
electronics. We're now talking about electronic organs rather than electric.
Yeah. So
electromechanic, I suppose.
Right. But the organ that I grew up with at home in Ireland, my gem prelude, which is still alive, it would have been very much referred to as a toaster by the organ aficionados. And this goes back to, we talked about these things generating heat. In England and Ireland in particular, that's the derogatory term that's applied to the electric organs of back in the day. But my gem prelude, it's still as heavy, but I've been in and around its electronics, and it's all capacitors, and there are no integrated circuits, because that was the next thing that happened, was the computer. So the development of transistors and integrated circuits and computers that allowed us to move to, modeling of organs and ultimately synthesizers, as Aaron mentioned. But I think the next thing that probably came after Hammond was the toaster, that's just using, so it's sound generator. There's a crystal oscillator like you'd have in your watch, that oscillates at a particular frequency, and then using capacitors and early transistors, it divides out those frequencies and makes 8-foot pitches and makes 4-foot pitches. And then they use other capacitors to shape them into kind of a flute and kind of whatnot.
Didn't Hammond also do so? I mean, I think the earliest ones, the name Baldwin comes to mind, the earliest of those sort of, where you actually had sort of tab stops that represented something. Don't forget, a Hammond organ, you make up your own sound based on the harmonic series. You've got your drawbars with various pitches, and you make up your own sounds. But the first ones that actually came up with things like, what would you call it? Subtractive synthesis. Now we're talking. You mentioned oscillators, filters, and all that kind of. Jerry, you said frequency dividers, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
And that kind of thing. And I think Hammond did something like that at some point. Was that maybe already the 40s? I'm guessing. Yeah, and then the Baldwin came into that as well at some point. I'm not sure when Baldwin started that, but they were definitely doing it. I'm going to say the 40s for that kind of thing.
Okay, which kind of makes sense. But what I love about this story and this exploration is, it's very easy to kind of get so focused on purely the history of the machine, of the instrument. But think about what's happening in the history of music as well, and how musicians at the time were taking these new and evolving instruments and bringing these sounds with them. And, Aaron, so you said the Hammond is difficult to lug up the stairs and onto stage, but it's a darn sight easier than lugging a Wurlitzer pipe organ with you, taking that wall of sound out of the church or concert hall. Here we have the organ that is evolving. But now today in the 2020s and whatnot, we think of that Hammond organ sound, and it's so much part of music. I mean, there's certain tracks and songs you couldn't imagine without it now, right? Exactly. I mean, it's very much a thing, but it was a necessary part of this evolution, even though there were perhaps folks in various camps that weren't a fan of these new instruments, but they were so important to where we are today. Really fascinating stuff.
I think electrical stuff in general. I was just going to say that apart from everything else electricity has done for us, I mean, making life easier with light bulbs and things, the gradual history of all this is you're seeing that organs became much more accessible. You don't have to go somewhere to have an organ. You can literally have one in your home. You can take one around in a van to gigs. You could busk on the street if you have a way to plug it in or have a battery, so it really made music that you hear through organs much more convenient, much more accessible. And of course, then with the advent of the internet and things, that we now have ability to hear organs around the world and then also recreate organs. I guess that's what we're kind of going at this, right? This is moving into a different realm.
And Aaron, I was hoping in film music you use sampled and virtual instruments a lot. And I think before we loop back to the organ world, how has that changed how you approach composing music, and what kind of changes have you seen outside of the organ world?
Yeah. Well, as a composer, this is part of this. This is going to a different realm here. But as a composer, what used to be the way, obviously, was completely human being based. So you had to have people pressing keys, using air to make sound out of instruments, and you had to hire people to play things that you wrote. But there was a guy in the late 80s. Well, he's very much a huge name now, but in the late 80s began. He moved from an 80s pop band called the Buggles, and he began doing film music. And this person's name is Hans Zimmer, and he changed the face of film composition and film music in general. Because before all that, like I said, you had to have people playing things. You had to have a record button to record things, and when he started doing things with sampling, it changed everything. Meaning, so you used to have to hire an orchestra of whatever it may be, 60 plus to 80 plus players. And with sampling, which is what we're going to get into next, I guess here, is you were able to record every note of an instrument. And it's gotten way more detailed than that now, but the idea behind it being you record every note that an instrument can make, and you save each of those recordings individually. And with the magic of a keyboard, an electronic keyboard, you can trigger or play back each of those recordings of each of those notes. And so I've always had people ask me what organ sampling is, and for non-organist terms, I try to make this as much possible to explain in layman's terms. But literally, with regards to organ, when I mentioned every note of an instrument, you have to record every pipe of the organ. So you're essentially having a recorder of some kind. You're recording middle C, record C sharp, you record D, and these are all separate recordings. This is the most basic way I can describe this. And then you assign those recordings on a computer to each key on a keyboard, which gives you the ability to play anywhere you have a computer. You can play these instruments back. And so this began originally with percussion instruments. Hans Zimmer did a lot of stuff because percussion was non-pitched. And so you could record a snare drum, you could record a bass drum, and you didn't have to worry about all the in-betweens that music has, because you just hit the thing and it makes the sound. And later on, they began doing things with strings. But of course, strings, when you play a string instrument from one note to another one, there is an in between when you're sliding on the neck or the fretboard or whatever it may be you're playing. There's that in between sound between the notes, and so it's been very, very hard to capture that. But they are getting much, much better at it now. So all the nuance, all the little things that you wouldn't think about when you're having a person just playing an instrument is now available to do on your own, in the box, on a computer, by yourself in a room, and this has completely changed the game. But it allows a composer to realize or hear what the music that they're writing in their head sounds like, kind of with real players. And technically, it is real players, because all these recordings you're triggering is somebody doing that note. It's not a computer doing that note. It's literally somebody playing that note. So, in the most basic terms, it's literally you're recording every note of an instrument, and you're assigning those recordings to a way to play it back through something called MIDI, which we don't have to get into, but it's literally on and off of the recording. So, yes. That's kind of in a nutshell. But for the cinematic world, it's definitely saved a lot of money, because you can have a kind of faux orchestral symphonic sound without having to hire an orchestra. Of course, they've sampled pianos. They sampled almost everything now. But I think there are a few places that you just won't be able to capture too well until AI gets a hold of everything, which it will be very soon. And that's voice is really hard to record, and woodwind instruments are very hard to record as well, because there's a lot of bending and moving of notes when you have a sustained pitch. That's hard to recreate, but it will get there, which is scary. But yes, that's sampling, and it's a scary thing. But it's also an amazing thing, and just to be able to hear what you've sort of been thinking in your brain's ear, to hear it realized is amazing. So this is kind of leading into. what happened with
it's
the
leading
Hauptwerk
into what
world.
happened with Hauptwerk. Absolutely. And Aaron, thank you so much for that background, because that background is so incredibly important to how Hauptwerk came to be. But again, it's the same idea. It's all about sort of democracy in these musical worlds. Like, for an independent composer, you may not have, how are you going to, as you're starting your career, get a whole orchestra to play your pieces and know if something is going to sound good? Of course, back in the day, you just had to do that, figure it out somehow. But it's an amazing time to be alive that we can do this. So the same is true of Hauptwerk and where the electric organ is today, which is why I think it is so exciting. And I think this is what we're also passionate about. So I've been involved in Hauptwerk since the beginning. So I'm off in my own little, world. The internet is just coming online, and there is an English mathematics professor called Martin Died, who also was a part-time organist at his local church of St. Anne's, Moseley.
And he's still alive, right?
Up to that. Yeah. He is very much
even
so.
Even though his name has died. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, he is the he better not, because right now he is the singular most important person behind Hauptwerk.
Yes.
But anyhow, he's the only one who knows how it all works.
It's a name. Go ahead.
But what an amazing guy. But so there's if for folks that may want to delve down this rabbit hole a little bit more deeply, archive.org is where pretty much the whole internet is archived in one shape or form. And you can go back and you can look at hauptwerk.co.uk, which first went online August 8th, 2002 with Hauptwerk version 1. That was when it's a little black and white page with just some text information and little blue links that you can follow and no pictures. And that's when it all began. So August 2002 was when the first version was released to the public on
that's
a
like
shareware
a savant
basis.
Level of like knowledge. What day of the week was that? Sorry.
that
what was the weather like?
It looks like it was a Thursday.
Okay. All right. There you go. I'm interjecting here, but keep going.
Yes. But
for those listeners who
this.
can't see what's going on here, I suspect Jerry has some kind of Wikipedia page open at the moment on his
Yes.
page.
I wasn't quite middle-aged back then, but I was working on it.
How old was Martin Died back then?
I don't know. I don't know that anybody has seen him, but he is a genius. Anyhow, the story goes that up to that point, so we've talked about Hammonds, we've talked about the toasters, and I actually had the Gem Prelude at home in my childhood home. But still, that was such a huge project getting that electric organ home, and very few people had home organs. So Martin noted that computers were becoming more powerful. He saw what was going on in the film world with Contact and these other sampling tools and said, you know what? Off-the-shelf components are powerful enough now that we may actually be able to just record a pipe organ pipe by pipe and write some software and play it back. And that was what he did. He went to his church, St. Anne's, Moseley, recorded it all pipe by pipe. And Hauptwerk version 1 was a simple sample player that played it all back. And that's how it all began. And as the years have evolved, the software has become more complicated. We've seen our computers get bigger and bigger and need more and more RAM. But the idea is that you go into a space with your fancy recorder, kind of like we mentioned in the last episode, set up some microphones. And as Aaron said, you record every single pipe in the organ with its natural acoustic. And then play a chord on the organ of Billerbeck, you're hearing those actual sounds as if you were in that space. And it is just amazing in terms of, what we can do as organists, so it really is an exciting time.
And for some perspective, I was going to say, thinking about how many pipes are in a pipe organ usually. I mean, the one that I play every Sunday is over 3,000. I was recently over at First Congregational LA, it's FCC LA, that has over 18,000 pipes. So it's
come on,
6 times the size of the one that I play. And you think about if we just casually said every pipe you record, well, that's 18,000, or 3,000 separate recordings that you have to make. And if it sounds tedious, it's because it is. And it is. And you talk about toasters. Well, you're going to be smelling toast when you're done doing that because it's so freaking tedious.
And let's not forget, you have to process those recordings. So and you're not just processing one recording of each pipe. You've probably recorded with microphones close up to the pipes, microphones slightly further back, microphones at the back of the church. You could have up to 8 different microphones. So 8 times 18,000, and off you go.
Right.
I'm smelling toast. Go ahead.
But what I absolutely love about the technology is when I stop and think what's going on. So first of all, when I stop and think what's going on in a real pipe organ, it is such an amazing feat of human engineering that you play a chord and all of these pipes, air rushes in and you have this amazing sound that just fills the space from multiple points of sound. So they've always been an amazing instrument, but Hauptwerk as a platform, the processor behind the scenes is playing back all of these recordings in perfect balance with almost zero latency. So as soon as you hit the key, the CPU is pulling up that recording and playing it back. And when you release the key, it's fading to the release and playing the next one. It really is witchcraft.
It is.
But it works. Somehow it works.
I regularly get emails from people sort of saying, oh, this is all very well, you playing Hauptwerk all the time. When are you going to get back out to play real organs again? And I always write back and say, well, theoretically, I am playing a real organ. And then you invariably get another reply saying, well, it's not the same. You see, you don't have the acoustic of the room. I said, well, actually, I do. And because you can tinker about with the audio levels within Hauptwerk, and you can actually create a better experience playing or listening to that organ than you could in the actual churches. If you were sitting in the church recording, or if I went to the church with my 2 or 3 microphones to make a recording for a YouTube video, it's actually better. The sound the audience gets is better through Hauptwerk already.
Right. And it's, here is an interesting, potentially meta question. So I think we'll all agree that there's something very special to going to a space and hearing the organ. Aaron, I think you recently got to hear FCCLA in person for the July 4th concerts, or Fraser.
May 4th,
we were all together in Gartshore, and you just walk around the space and you're just surrounded by sound. It is just amazing. Or you sit at the console and you draw the tuba stop and you play. Oh my gosh. However, if I'm sitting here on my couch and I'm listening to a recording that you made in Gartshore versus I'm listening to you playing recordings of individual pipes of Gartshore being compressed together in real time, it's still coming out of my speakers. Yeah. Is it really different?
Exactly.
Really different. It's still a recording of the organ. You're just playing.
Exactly that.
You're just playing. As Aaron, you mentioned, all the notes were played and recorded just in a different order, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
that's it. It's exactly that. So you could argue, we could get very aesthetic about this. When you go and hear, let's say, a symphony orchestra playing live, you're sitting in that concert hall. You've got a seat. The ideal seat is going to be in the middle of the concert hall, in the middle of this seating stalls downstairs. That's the way it was designed to sound perfect, etc., etc. One person gets that experience in the concert hall. Someone who maybe got a cheaper ticket is sitting miles away, and they're going to get a very different sort of sound. So on the way home, they decide to buy a CD or buy a recording, or nowadays download something from Apple Music, or not even download it. They just stream it these days from Apple Music or Spotify, whatever, to get that experience again. The experience they then get from the recording is technically better than the experience they had in the concert hall, unless they were sitting in that perfect seat. But nonetheless, this experience they had sitting in the concert hall is the air moving, the actual instruments creating the actual sound. If you go to a big band concert, you get the trombones blasting out at you, the saxophones, and everything moves in a different direction. Okay, a perfect recording of that will recreate some of that sound, but it doesn't recreate the feeling of that live. And it's the same here. Whether you have a CD recording of an organ or a Hauptwerk performance of an organ, it's still not being in that church. The thing is, of course, when you go to that church and sit and hear the organ, you might not like it. The organs, the pipes are hidden behind a pillar somewhere. You're seated, hidden behind a pillar somewhere. The tuba is horrendously out of tune because it's a December concert, etc., etc. So theoretically, Hauptwerk is giving the listener the best possible, best possible audio experience of that organ that can be recreated live.
Yeah, I think that's so well put. So I think, when we look at Hauptwerk right now, it is based on current technology, unquestionably the best way to have an organ at home and experience an instrument. I think it is an amazing way, thanks to YouTube and social media, to spread the organ sound to areas that it might not be heard. And Aaron, combining it in ways that we may not think of before. And then very importantly, documenting, I think sampling organs, because at least now there is a playable recording. It's not, it's one thing if we go to a church and make a CD of the organ and then, heaven forbid, something happens, there's a fire. But with a Hauptwerk sample of an organ, you now have a playable document of that instrument, which is almost like an insurance policy. Or even in the case of Peterborough Cathedral that I'm playing with right now, that was sampled before they did a repitch of the whole organ. So they adjusted the pitch of all 10,000 pipes or whatever. So they preserved it before that, which is really cool. So I think it's an incredibly important and cool platform. I know people have strong opinions, right? I think that's what we can say when it comes to electric organs. But I think the current state of the art is something really special.
And I think at the end of the day, just this entire gamut of history we've been discussing of this kind of organ, going back from the Hammonds and things, and before that, it really, you're talking about the future of the instrument. It gives anybody the ability to sit at home and practice without having to go find a church or go find a concert hall or go ask somebody
or
permission.
Find an electone.
Yes, exactly. And it's really the easiest and best way to preserve and to foster new musicians playing the organ. So that's the whole goal is that, if you want to badmouth how it's not a real organ, whatever it may be, think about what it's doing for the future of the instrument, where you can literally have this in your home, in your living room, and practice whenever you want. And that's the coolest thing. I mean, having Hauptwerk at home, or even having whatever it may be, an electone, you're able to be in your pajamas, practice, and go to bed. Before all this, before I even got into Hauptwerk, I had to drive to church and practice, and I would get done really late at night, and you're out in the darkness by yourself. I'm in LA, you just never know. And so I had to walk to my car by myself. I mean, it would be 2 a.m, and now I can just be at home and go to bed afterwards. It's manifold is such a help to the organ world in general and the future of everything. So it's amazing technology, and I think it's vital for the survival of the instrument. So.
You said a word there I didn't understand. You said practice. What does that mean?
Well,
that's when you're playing your Beethoven, and
I said I used to practice.
Practicing.
Oh, I see.
I never understood that word.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, I'm going to have to get back to practice. But you know what? That is a perfect transition to our stop gear. So guys, I think this month we said we were going to talk about forScore, which is the iPad app that has kind of become ubiquitous in organ circles. I remember when the first iPad came out, and I remember being fascinated. Now, I'd been using, they had PDF sheet music at the time that came on CDs. This was before IMSLP. And I used to print out this music, and that's how I'd access my Bach and whatnot. But I remember, wouldn't it be great to have a sheet music display that you could carry around with you? Well, it certainly wasn't available on the first iPad. And at the time, the screen wasn't really big. The resolution wasn't that good. But years go by, the device gets better, and an application called forScore was developed. And for our friends that may not be familiar with this, forScore is an application which runs on your iPad. It's a dedicated sheet music viewer. So it is a PDF viewer for displaying electronic documents. but it is specialized in that it has tools to allow for easy page turning, easy filing and creating of set lists when you're playing a concert. It has tools that you can use the Apple Pencil to make annotations on the page. And it really is just fantastic how I've gone from having to carry around books and, maybe I forgot to bring a book with me, to now it's all on my iPad. And through the magic of iCloud, it syncs between my iPhone and other iPads, which we may mention. Some of you may have seen on some of my streams, there is a companion application by the same company. It's called Q. And with Q running on a second iPad and the two sitting next to each other, they can do fun things. Specifically, you can have a 2-page display. So it's really like playing from a book. forScore also has the ability that, several players in an ensemble can share music with each other. So everybody can literally be on the same page. But what do you guys think? Tell me about your experience with forScore.
I've been using forScore for many years now, since before the pandemic. Now, using it for organ has been fairly new for me. I've mainly used it as an accompanist, as a pianist for choirs and singers and solo instrumentalists. Most of my day job work is in schools and in colleges. And so I did a lot of work with local groups and things as well with using forScore. Now, of the past few years, I've become much more used to using it at the pipe organ. And it's very, very helpful for me week to week, especially on my spontaneous Sunday programs, which happen on Sunday evenings. So every Sunday evening, I do a spontaneous Sunday live stream at 5 p.m. Pacific. And I use my iPad every week for it and use forScore. And it helps me to keep everything organized, for lack of a better word, organized. That joke has been done so many times. But anyway, I use it every week for that. And so the ability to create set lists is kind of a lifesaver. So I've been able to gather together, say I'm going to do a live stream that has 10 songs and I want to improvise on those songs. And so I usually can go find some lead sheets somewhere, either using a real book, which real book is a title of a book, actually, not just saying it's a physical book, but the real book is the name of a book that collects melodies that are very popular. And so there's a bunch of versions of quote unquote the real book. And there's pop ones, there's rock ones, there's blues ones, there's bluegrass ones, there is country ones, and I should say there are country ones. And anyway, so I've been slowly sort of scanning those into forScore and having those lead sheets able to be, brought up at any kind of, on a whim. If someone requests a song, I have it right there for me. So making set lists of what I'm going to be playing for a show, I'll just design it all in forScore. And when I've been using it for organ, the benefit that I've found there, which has been in the past, I would say maybe 2 or 3 years, the benefit of using it with organ is that on Sunday mornings for church services, I scan my prelude and my postlude into my iPad, and I scan in the choir anthem. So I actually don't quite use the winking, or however you call it, twitching kind of motion gestures for training pages. I do sometimes if I'm sort of stuck and don't have any kind of other way to do it. But I have found for my own console at church, I found these buttons on Amazon called flick buttons. And the flick buttons are these circular buttons that are just barely bigger than an organ piston that you would set a preset on an organ. And they have an adhesive back to them. They've got a battery and they stick right in place beneath the manuals. And so you can program them to do whatever you want. So I have 2 of them on my console at my church. One's just below the grade manual and one's just below the choir manual. And if you place it just right in the central part of the keyboard, you can, with your thumb or any kind of free finger while you're playing, push the button and turn the page for yourself. And that has been a game changer for me. So I'm able to register an entire choir anthem and not once worry about having to reach up and turn a page while I'm playing. I can just keep pushing the button at the manuals as I'm going along. So I think my next level of all this will be eventually finding a way to get another flick button and attach it somehow near the pedals. And I'll probably have to find a way to hack it and add some kind of a toe stud of some kind to it that I can take the pressure of my foot pushing it to turn a page. But being able to have a page turning device like that is a game changer as an organist. You just can have any length of piece, and as long as you have a free finger while you're playing, just to push, you don't need to have a whole hand free, just a finger free. You can push that page turn button, and it's so much easier. So that's been my biggest help with forScore, is just been using it for gigs where I'm accompanying and I have to make a set list, or making a set list for a YouTube live stream, any kind of organ concert that I'm doing. You just keep turning. It's like you have a binder in front of you that doesn't have to turn pages. You just have a binder essentially in digital form. You've got all your music laid out in order, and you just turn to the next page and turn to the next page, and you just keep going to the end. So for my live stream gigs, it's been a big help. And then also for church, being able to use it on Sunday mornings. And I guess I could go all the way and try to scan all the hymns in as well. Then you'd have the entire church service in the iPad. And I guess that probably would be a good, worthy goal to achieve, because that would be completely autonomous from having to have a physical hymnal in front of me and just being able to call up a hymn easily and design my Sunday morning binder in the digital realm with that. So that's kind of my use of forScore. It is with me every day. I use it on everything I do, and it is really a lifesaver. And it's just the fact that you don't have to carry all kinds of books with you and sheet music books and things when you're traveling to gigs is just so much better. Gone are the days of having to have a stack of various wedding books when you're going to go play a wedding. You just scan the things you need for the wedding and go. So you think about, well, will it ever fail on you? Will the screen ever shut off, or will something go wrong? And, knock on wood, all the years that I've been using this, I have yet to have a problem with it. It has always worked. That being said, I take precautions. When I'm doing a concert, I turn off my Wi-Fi so there's no unexpected kind of, updates or, trying to shut down and restart or something like that. So I make sure that doesn't happen. But there's also, when I'm playing piano, for instance, I have a separate Bluetooth page turning set of pedals, or two pedals side by side that are connected in the middle. And one turns the page to the left and one turns the page to the right. And again, it has always worked. You keep the battery charged, and whenever you're playing concerts, it has yet to fail me. Now, knock on wood, I've been using iPad with forScore in concerts and rehearsals, I think since 2018, 2019. And again, it has yet to fail on me. And that is just a testament to how robust and sturdy that software is. So yes, it's a very highly recommended thing that I use all the time as an accompanist, as a pianist, as an organist, whatever you may play. It is an invaluable tool. So I very much am in favor of forScore.
forScore on the iPad. Yes. Now, I love forScore. I've been using this for probably over a year now. Now, I must admit, I got the idea from our friend and online colleague, Mr. James Flores over in Australia. Jimmy Two Pads, as we called him in the old days. James Flores started using forScore ages and ages and ages ago, and he had a wonderful setup, and he had two side by side, and he was using this program forScore. And I was fascinated by this, and I reached out to James and asked him exactly what this was. What was he doing? So he told me it was forScore. I, at the time, did I have my iPad Pro at the time? I think I did. It was actually Vanessa's iPad. Psh, don't tell her. I borrowed the wife's iPad Pro, installed forScore on it, just started adding PDF documents to it. And at the beginning, I was airdropping things onto my iPad and opening them with forScore. And then eventually I realized, because I'm a Mac user anyway, this is absolutely brilliant. You've got forScore on the Mac as well. It's on my laptop. And you can, from the interweb, you can download your PDFs. You can scan your own music as a PDF and have it all stashed away on a laptop, or on my case on my NAS. And from there, you can then open all of these documents in forScore on the Mac, and it automatically synchronizes everything over to the iPad. So in the Mac, when I'm doing a concert program, for example, I will put my concert program together on the Mac. I also have one rather amazing PDF file, and it's all of my jazz standards. This is some crazy guy many years ago physically wrote down, pen on paper, hand wrote all of these jazz standards, the melodies and the harmonies, into this wonderful book. And I have a PDF version of that book. And of course, it's about 2,000 pages long or things like that. So obviously, you don't want to be scrolling through 2,000 pages of that. So you can take individual pages of that huge document, mark them, and have them sort of like individual files, which then you can put into a program or a list, concert program or your list. It's absolutely wonderful. That's all I use it for. There are a couple of bugs. Sometimes the synchronization thing doesn't work on the fly. The thing I love the most about it, though, is just the gestures you can use to turn pages. You can, of course, turn pages just by tapping on the screen, which is useful. Sophisticated. I love the word sophisticated when it comes to software, just like Hauptwerk. But yeah, I think forScore is absolutely wonderful. It amazes me in this day and age when you watch some performers on YouTube. I'm not going to name any names, but they know who they are, and I hope they're listening. And you see them with photocopies of a score of music, and it's been photocopied down, sort of 4 pages onto one A4 sized page, and then sellotaped together, all taped together, and then sort of stuck onto the music desk with pins or more tape. Or it looks so unprofessional. I'm sorry, it just does. Yes, and I know you've got your markings on there, but well, if you have an Apple Pencil, you can mark your scores as well on your iPad. So it looks much more professional these days. Okay, you've got to make sure the battery's charged on the iPad, but that's the least of your worries. Downside, you've got to keep your eye on the iPad. I've heard tales of people turning up to concerts. They've set the organ up. They've left the iPad on the music desk. They went off to freshen up before the concert, came back, and the iPad was gone. Yeah, I have heard tales of that happening. So obviously there's a little element of security there in certain cases. But for me, it's absolutely wonderful. I would not change it for the world. I can highly recommend it to anyone. It's quite interesting, actually. We were talking about the joys of the iPad and modern technology, and earlier I was talking about writing everything down in a lined notepad, very old-fashioned. So yeah, I suppose I'm a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to that. The things I used to do, I like to do them in the old-fashioned way. Reminds me of my studio days. And I think modern technology now, it's so much easier to have all your music in one place on one device. It's wonderful.
So yeah, as I said, this is just an amazing piece of technology, something I can't imagine being without at this point. And I think you probably all feel the same way. Yeah. Go check it out if you're not familiar. If this is something that interests you, it's available on the App Store. Certainly, it's a go-to application for me. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed spending this time with us. We certainly had a blast. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you next time. I'm Jerry Martin.
I'm Fraser Gartshore.
And I am Aaron Shows.
And this has been
Stop It.